It also means that what happened to me might not happen to another family with similar circumstances, that their family may not have to suffer being torn apart for months, not knowing what the future holds. For these reasons, I wholeheartedly request that the New York State Legislature pass this legislation for equal access to driver's license, regardless of immigration status. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming here and putting a face on this issue. I think it's important that we hear from ordinary citizens and people who are impacted so much by what we do here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call Douglas Schwartz, board member, National Limousine Association, and Kevin Barwell, President, Limousine Bus Taxi Operators of Upstate New York. And if the remaining, there should be 3 additional witnesses left, if you would just make sure you're up and ready to go.
Madam Chairs, members of the Assembly and Senate, I thank you for allowing me to speak about the proposed legislation that applies to stretch limousines. Although the recent limousine accident was horrific, and somebody knows somebody who was involved in that accident, and I'm a parent myself, and it's horrible even to think about, I think it's unfair to punish a whole industry because of a rogue operator. We should punish the operator. The state DOT has processes in place to protect passengers of these vehicles with inspections and with background checks for drivers and drug testing and all kinds of different things that they do. And this was obviously an operator that hadn't followed any of these rules and regulations. We feel that limousines are a safe mode of transportation and actually keep some drunk drivers off the road. On Long Island, where I'm located, we do a big business out to the wineries on the East End. And I can only imagine if we weren't able to provide service for them, how many people would drive themselves. In addition, federal DOT, we believe, will allow vehicles to cross the border from New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, and Canada to come into our state and supply transportation to these people anyway. This is going to create a loss of revenue for our residents and a loss of sales tax. The National Limousine Association and a few other local associations, this is Kevin from the Upstate Association, we thought of a few things that the state could do. One would be to limit the capacity to double the manufacturer's capacity. So if you had a Suburban and it was an 8-passenger capacity, you could stretch it and the limit would be 16. Don't build these big, giant vehicles anymore. Also, the vehicle should have a 10-year operating limit, so they have the latest safety technologies. Seatbelts should be a requirement in all vehicles. And we agree with most of the other processes that they plan to put in place as far as charging for DOT inspection fees and the high fines. We are legitimate operators, and we agree with that. Whatever is put in place, we'd like to ask for a 24-month sunset clause so as not to create havoc in our industry for operators that have these vehicles and brides that have them reserved in the future already. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Chairman Weinstein, Chairman Krieger, Chairman Kennedy, members of the Senate Assembly, thank you for letting us speak here today. We are speaking here in regard to the proposed legislation that the governor has proposed in his budget, which would eliminate stretch limousines or manufactured modified vehicles. I represent most of the companies across the state and most of the major cities in Buffalo. I am from Buffalo, so I understand the snow we're having, and I think I'm staying here tonight. I also in cities of Syracuse, cities of Rochester, Albany, and in the southern tier as well. We believe this accident that killed the 20 people was a horrific tragedy, and our hearts go out to the families and the people involved. This is something that should have never happened. With better policing, the accident should have never happened. We agree with the governor on a few points about this legislation. We agree that higher fines, heavier penalties, and a change to incorporate stronger safety, this will stop the rogue operators and better establish a method for which our operators in the transportation industry should follow. These specific items will not really affect many of our members because many of our members and many of the operators especially believe in safety first. They have premier compliance ratings with the DOT and their insurance, and follow strict protocol when it comes to operating these vehicles. They are the legitimate operators. But I do believe that we should not be punished for one bad apple. There have been many transportation accidents in New York State involving school buses, coach buses, public transit vehicles, ambulance, yet they have not been banned for these types of vehicles. After Flight 3407, which killed 50 people outside of Buffalo, we didn't ban airplanes. Or when a megabus crashed outside of Syracuse, killing 4 people, we didn't ban motor coaches. And just this past week on Monday in Brooklyn, 10 children were injured on a school bus, and we're not banning those either. No, we have learned from this and made adjustments to make things safer and policies better. Many of these vehicles that I have mentioned have been modified in some way or form, whether it's been the interior or the exterior. So what does this mean? Are we banning every form of transportation I have just mentioned, or just singling out one? Why? There have been more fatality-related accidents in any form and other forms of ground transportation in New York, and they are still operating. Ironically, there have been 134 fatalities on school buses just this past year. This accident, nor the one in Long Island a few years ago, had nothing to do with how the vehicle was remanufactured. So why are we asking legitimate limousine operators who follow some of the strictest DOT laws in the country and pass a DOT inspection on their vehicles twice a year, not including any roadside inspections which they are required to get rid of their fleet and possibly their businesses? This is an unfair action that may bankrupt many of your constituents that have operations in your districts. Devalue their vehicles, loss of jobs, loss of tax revenue, including a major part of the $26 million sales tax revenue. This is kind of like telling Trailways or Gray Line you can't use buses anymore, or a pizzeria you can't sell pizza. As my colleague mentioned to me, we do suggest that the vehicles that be stretched are no more than double the seating capacity of the manufacturer's seating capacity of the vehicles being modified, and only pertain to vehicles that have been stretched, similar to the law that's in New Jersey. Also, no stretched vehicles can be over 10 years old in the for-hire business. This will allow them to meet the latest technologies, and seatbelts be required in all new vehicles moving forward, such as how the federal law was enacted, which is presently requires seatbelts federally as well. And that there be also a 24-month sunset period for companies to matriculate these vehicles that don't meet the standards we have mentioned out of their fleets. Also, finally, we ask that all for-hire drivers have background checks meeting the federal FBI background checks as well, similar to meeting with 19A certification. We completely understand that policing needs to be on the forefront of all of this, and we've been asking this for years in our industry. For over the past 10 years, we've been hit with many things, such as double taxation, where we are charged for our tangible items, ride sharing, which we've created a completely unfair working advantage with limousine operators, and now this proposed ban on stretch limousines. We have lost many companies in upstate New York. Many of the cities have lost 70% of their operators over the decade with these changes. So we implore you to please rethink the legislation so that we can make it a safer place for our industry, make it a better policed, keep the businesses alive. Limousines do statistically prove they reduce drunk driving, bring in tax revenue, and keep the roads safer with these legitimate operators. So as Governor Cuomo said in his October during his press conference, the laws are fine and some of the strictest. It's a bad operator, not the laws. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Senator Kennedy?
Yes, thank you both for your testimony and your suggestions. We all are sympathetic and continue to be heartbroken over the horrific tragedy that happened not too far from here. And it called into question many of the regulations that currently exist, and quite frankly, many that don't exist at all. And that is why we are taking a very close look at the industry in general. And we will be holding hearings in the not too distant future on these issues. What I want to ask you is about one of your suggestions about the 10-year operating limit. What would you think about, rather than a 10-year limit in time, a limited mileage to a vehicle?
Either one works in either situation. I mean, we run a fairly, large and a fairly good company, and we turn our vehicles over. It's just cheaper for a good operator to turn his vehicles over. And you have the latest technologies, which is a better thing. So I think either situation.
I think it might be a little different upstate. When you look at New York City has a larger populace to solicit those vehicles. In the upstate area,